I walked into the repair shop on Commercial Street with my husband's phone in my hand, thinking it was nothing more than a simple Tuesday errand. But when Kevin Torres pulled me aside and silently turned the lit screen toward me, my entire future shattered into neat, glowing squares. I had only meant to fix a cracked screen. Instead, I found a row of scheduled text messages, lined up and ready to send without him ever touching the phone. I've always believed it's the quiet, automatic decisions that shape our lives more than the dramatic ones. That morning in Portland, Maine, I had simply picked up Robert's phone from his nightstand, noticed the spiderweb crack he'd ignored for weeks, and decided to help. I never imagined that small kindness would split my marriage clean down the center. My name is Stella Hammond. I'm 66 years old, married to the same man for 41 years in our old Victorian on Munjoy Hill, the house where our 3 children learned to climb the stairs carefully and where, years later, grandchildren trailed in December snow and July sand as though the walls themselves breathed with the seasons. After nearly 4 decades working as a librarian, I had stepped into retirement, into a life that felt steady and predictable in the best possible way, the kind of calm you trust without checking the forecast. Robert still worked part-time as a dentist, always talking about retiring soon, though the restless pacing and constant phone checking the night before hinted at a different kind of countdown. For decades our roles had been clearly defined, as orderly as a card catalog. He handled the finances and the major decisions. I kept the house balanced and the peace undisturbed. Over time, I learned not to push when his voice slipped into that smooth, clinical calm that reassured patients and slowly quieted me. Kevin's shop, wedged between a cafe and a used bookstore, had survived because the neighborhood trusted it, like a porch light you expect to glow every evening. For 15 years, he'd repaired our devices and, in small ways, our nerves. His wife once brought me soup when pneumonia settled in my lungs. His daughter used to attend my book club. So when he called at 3:30 with unusual urgency and asked me to come alone, I felt that subtle shift older women recognize, the sense that time is about to divide into before and after. He locked the door, flipped the sign, and said my name with a care I'd never heard from him. Then he told me to freeze our credit cards and change the locks. When I demanded to know why, he showed me 7 text messages, all scheduled for future dates, sent to a single number over 3 months. There were no declarations of love, only instructions, insurance policy numbers, safe combinations, repeated references to my supposed memory problems he had allegedly reported to Dr. Patterson. It was a tidy plan to rationalize my death and claim a $750,000 insurance payout. The final message, scheduled for January 12th, read, "It's done. Funeral was yesterday. Boca next week. Condo ready." As if my absence were just another task checked off a list. Kevin, pale and shaken, urged me to call the police. But I understood how quickly a respected dentist could reframe drafts as harmless hypotheticals, while a retired librarian could be portrayed as forgetful. So I asked him to document everything, every screen, every timestamp, then return the phone tomorrow with a friendly smile and the assurance that nothing unusual had appeared. Sometimes the only way to catch someone in a trap is to let them believe you never saw it. I drove home through late October light that turned the bay into hammered gold. I prepared wild salmon exactly as I always did, my hands following a memorized rhythm while my mind redrew the map of my life. At 6:15, Robert walked in, kissed my cheek, and talked about his dental office, our son's Thanksgiving plans, the Red Sox. His voice kept steady time like a metronome. I waited for a crack in the rhythm. None came. Even when he mentioned one last big Christmas in the old house and gently suggested we downsize because I might be slipping, I answered softly that my memory was fine. I had no intention of telling him I now understood I was living with a man who saw me as an obstacle with an expiration date. Later, while he settled into his study, I washed the dishes, went upstairs to a bedroom that suddenly felt staged, and sat at my desk. Robert had never felt the need to hide from me, so he had never changed his passwords. After hours of careful searching, I found a folder buried under a bland, forgettable label. the kind men choose when they assume women won't look closely. Inside was the trail to L. Hardy. Early notes about valuing his dental practice. Later phrases about a clean break from your current situation. A condo in Boca Raton closing in January, the same month my scheduled funeral would supposedly be behind us. The numbers revealed a practice worth nearly $2 million, not the modest figure he had always claimed. I took screenshots, sent them to a private account, erased my tracks, and lay down beside a husband who slept soundly, his arm draped across my pillow. The weight of it felt like an artifact from a museum dedicated to a life I thought I understood. At dawn, I walked to the only place that steadied my breathing and sharpened my thoughts, the Portland Public Library. After nearly 40 years, it still felt like home. I approached Marion at the reference desk and asked for discreet help, a phrase librarians understand instinctively. Together we followed the thread from L to Laura Hardy, 42, a Boston-based consultant specializing in medical practice acquisitions, divorced, successful, frequently in Portland for work. As search results settled into a clear biography and travel pattern, the line connecting a Boca condo, a January closing, and my alleged memory decline became straight and undeniable. Standing in that quiet sanctuary of shelves and sunlight, I realized the woman I had been for years, the one who balanced the checkbook of peace and wrapped the holiday china just so, would have waited and hoped. But the woman those messages created in me understood that hope is not a strategy. The safest place for truth is inside a carefully assembled file, behind a calm expression, governed by a clock I now intended to control. By the time Marion and I finished, denial had no place left to hide. Laura Hardy was real. The condo was real. And January 12th was approaching. Marion found her on LinkedIn, polished and precise. 42. Newly relocated to Portland to oversee a major acquisition. Property records showed a cash purchase 6 months earlier, an $800,000 Harborview condo on Pearl Street. The money traced directly back to Robert's practice account. By noon, we had redrawn the map of my marriage. Laura's finances were crumbling, failed ventures, unpaid loans, creditors circling. The Portland condo had been purchased through a shell company funded by Robert's dental office. Either she was siphoning money from him, or he was financing her future. Then Marion uncovered an elder fraud complaint filed in Massachusetts, a patient accusing Laura of pressuring him into signing over assets. The case had been dismissed for lack of evidence. "She has a pattern," Marion whispered. And suddenly I saw it clearly. Robert wasn't the predator. He was prey, who believed he was hunting. He thought he was orchestrating my death. But Laura Hardy had likely already begun orchestrating his. My phone buzzed. Robert's voice came tight and controlled, anger coiled beneath the surface. He demanded I come home immediately. Dr. Patterson was there, he said, making a house call to evaluate my cognitive screening. There had never been any screening. I understood at once. Robert was fabricating medical records in real time, building documentation of my decline. If I refused, I would look paranoid. If I agreed, I could prove my clarity on record. I told Marion I would take the test and pass it. When I walked into the house, the scene was staged. A folder labeled Cognitive Assessment sat ready. Dr. Patterson looked uneasy. Robert looked assured. The test was subtle, designed to trip me with gentle misdirection. But 41 years of marriage had taught me how to hear the silence between Robert's words. I answered each question precisely, dismantling the trap. When it ended, Dr. Patterson admitted my cognition was flawless. That's when I exposed the forgery. The wrong suite number, incorrect letterhead, a mismatched date. I forced the doctor to see he was holding evidence of a crime. He fled, leaving Robert and me alone in a silence that felt like a sealed room filling slowly with gas. Robert tried to rewrite the moment as concern for his confused wife. But when he grabbed my wrist and demanded how much I knew, the mask dropped. I told him everything: the Boca condo, the $800,000 transfer, the woman with a history of targeting older men. His eyes shifted from fear to calculation. He admitted the affair, dressed it up as a midlife awakening. Claimed the texts were fantasy. When I refused that version, he shifted to power. He reminded me he was executor of the will, that Patterson's forged notes positioned him as my guardian-in-waiting, that with one call, he could have me placed on a 72-hour psychiatric hold, and when I came out, there would be documentation to prove I was unstable. He was right. The system would likely believe him. I had confronted him too soon. Then a message flashed from Marion. Urgent discovery.
Come now.
Don't call. I bluffed my way out of the house and met her at the library. The headlines she showed me froze my blood. 3 dead men. 3 accidents. Each wealthy. Each older. Each romantically linked to Laura Hardy. 1 overdose. 1 carbon monoxide incident. 1 ruled a suicide. Every time, Laura walked away untouched and richer. She was the common thread, the pattern repeating, and my husband was next. For a fleeting second, I considered letting her finish what he had started. But the faces of our children, Michael, Michelle, Jennifer, cut through the anger. If Robert died without the truth exposed, our family would drown in suspicion and disgrace. I had to prove it all. I had to confront her. Her building on Pearl Street gleamed with curated luxury, the kind meant to impress accountants and haunt ghosts. I pressed the buzzer.
Once. Twice.
Her voice came through the speaker, smooth and unhurried. I introduced myself.
Stella Amund.
A brief pause. Then, 4th floor. The elevator's hum sounded like a countdown. Laura opened the door before I could knock. She was striking, yes, but more than that, she was precise. Intentional. The kind of woman who measured every word before it ever left her mouth. She studied people the way others study blueprints, searching for leverage. She greeted me by name and said she'd been waiting for me. The condo was sleek and spare, expensive without trying, the harbor stretching wide beyond the glass. She offered wine. I declined. She mentioned Robert's concern about my growing paranoia. When I refused to step into that script, she let the mask fall. With unnerving composure, she outlined everything: Robert's intention to kill me, how he planned to stage it, and how, once he had served his purpose, she would remove him as well. She spoke as if she were discussing a weather forecast, a murder-suicide arranged for sympathy, assets liquidated under her guidance for a consulting fee. Then she smiled and presented her proposal. Help her expose Robert. Testify. Stay alive. Split the value of the practice. $1 million each. A partnership forged in hell. She promised protection, money, vindication. And as I stared at a woman linked to 3 dead men offering me survival at half price, I understood that my next words would determine who reached January 12th and who wouldn't. By the time she finished, the cafe's warmth felt artificial, like soft light wrapped around a blade. She sat across from me with quiet certainty, as though she had already scripted my ending. Her voice remained steady, deliberate. Or you can try to stop him alone, she said, and become another tragic headline. An elderly woman with dementia who overdosed. What do you think he has planned? Pills? A fall? Carbon monoxide while you're asleep? My phone buzzed. A message from Robert. Where are you? We need to talk.
Come home.
Laura watched the blood drain from my face and smiled faintly. He's losing patience, she murmured. He's about to act. So, Stella, do you partner with me and survive, or go home and take your chances? 8 hours until midnight. 8 hours to choose between a killer's offer and a murderer's arms. I stepped into the cold October rain. Robert's texts followed in quick succession. Stella, please come home. I'm worried about you. The streets shimmered in wet reflections, and for the first time, I felt what it meant to be hunted from both sides. Robert wanted freedom and insurance money. Laura wanted profit and insulation. Both believed I was defenseless. I drove to the Eastern Promenade and parked near the overlook. The bay lay beneath storm clouds like black glass. The air tasted metallic, salted with rain. My thoughts turned sharp, almost clinical. I wasn't prey anymore. I was cataloging predators. Robert had already begun dismantling my credibility, calling our children and reshaping reality into his narrative of my decline. When my oldest, Michael, called, his tone held something new, not just concern, but doubt planted by his father. He said Robert told him I'd been imagining forged documents and mysterious women. When he mentioned a facility for evaluation, I saw the next step clearly. If Robert couldn't kill me discreetly, he would institutionalize me and let the system finish the job. I needed to break that illusion before it solidified. So I asked Michael one precise question. Where was I on September 12th? He hesitated.
Confused.
I explained that Robert had created medical records claiming I'd been at Dr. Patterson's office that day, while I had actually been at a library conference in Boston, complete with receipts, photographs, and witnesses. Silence replaced his certainty. Someone is trying to make me look incompetent, I told him. And it's your father. He promised to come. He would bring Michelle and Jennifer. I could only hope they arrived before the curtain fell. 3 hours to midnight. The rain had stopped, leaving the air raw. I called Marion. Together, under the fluorescent hum of the library, we assembled a dossier thick enough to fill a courtroom. Emails, bank transfers, forged documents, each one dated and cross-referenced. A methodical record of betrayal. But as we stared at the stack, I knew paper wasn't enough. Documents could be disputed. Stories reframed. I needed proof that carried its own confession.
So I laid the trap.
At 9 o'clock, I called Laura and told her I had decided to join her plan, that survival mattered more than pride. We arranged to meet at a public cafe on Congress Street. Neutral ground. Open space. Witnesses. I wasn't alone. Marion sat at a nearby table, laptop open, her phone quietly recording both audio and video. Laura arrived precisely on time, composed as ever, cappuccino in hand. She slid into the booth with the ease of someone unused to being cornered. A folder rested in her grasp, edges aligned perfectly. So, she said, you've chosen wisely. I've chosen to live, I answered. She smiled faintly. That's not quite the same. She pushed the folder toward me. Inside were copies of Robert's messages, the financial transfers, even the falsified medical documents. It was too pristine, curated like an exhibit. This is what the police will need, she said. We go tomorrow morning. Together. 2 credible women telling the same story. They arrest Robert immediately. It was bait, structured, logical bait. She needed me entangled, so she could steer the narrative once Robert was removed. And after he's arrested? I asked. You retain me to manage the sale. I take my fee. You take the remainder. We both leave clean. When I mentioned the 3 dead men linked to her name, she didn't blink. I never killed anyone, Stella.
People do.
Accidents happen. Try connecting me, and you'll look unstable. Suspicious wives always do. Her phone buzzed. A quick glance. A tightening around her eyes. Robert, she said. He's nervous. Wants me at your house tonight. Says he needs help. She held my gaze steadily. He plans to do it this evening. He wants me there to stage it properly. Outside, the city moved on, headlights gliding across wet streets while the clock edged toward midnight. I understood then that the real storm wasn't outside. It was gathering inside my house, between 2 predators waiting for me to return. Let's call the police now, I said. She rose smoothly. There's nothing to report yet. Just a husband texting his business partner. We go tomorrow morning as planned. You find somewhere safe tonight. She disappeared into the October darkness. Marion stepped beside me. I slipped the library's small digital recorder back into my purse. We had captured every word, her acknowledgement of working with Robert, her confirmation that my death was scheduled for tonight. Not a headline yet, but a lever strong enough to pry open the whole rotten machine. I'm going home, I told Marion. The only way to stop a train in motion is to stand on the tracks with the camera running. I left her with instructions no friend should ever receive. If I didn't call by midnight, she was to take the file and the recording to the police and speak my name clearly. The house waited like a stage set for its final act. One kitchen light glowed. A bottle sat open on the table. 2 glasses already poured, positioned as if highlighted in a script. Robert smiled with that familiar warmth that had once disguised sins I never imagined. He invited me to sit, to talk, to fix what was broken. I remained standing. I hadn't come to join the performance. I had come to end it. "Where's Laura?" I asked. A flicker crossed his face before he masked it. I told him she wasn't coming, that she was finished with him, and that he was alone now with a wife who knew the full story and a plan already unraveling. "How much do you know?" he demanded. "Everything." I lifted my phone and let him hear Laura's voice, calmly stating that he intended to do it tonight and needed her to help stage it. I watched the color drain from his face, then surge back in angry waves. He said I had destroyed everything, when all I had done was survive long enough to read the fine print. I bluffed hard, told him the children were on their way, that our lawyer had copies, that the police had already been briefed. And I saw him calculating, recalibrating, running through escape routes in real time. I watched calculations flicker behind his eyes until finally his shoulders slumped. He took a long drink and said something colder than the rain outside, that Laura wasn't done with either of us. "She never left loose ends," he said. And now we were the loose ends. The window shattered with a crack like a gunshot. Glass sprayed across the kitchen tiles. Footsteps sounded on the porch. The back handle turned slowly. She walked in wearing gloves and a patience that felt bottomless. The woman who had turned death into a business told us to stand. And we stood, because sometimes staying alive begins with doing exactly what you're told. She spoke as if explaining a lab experiment. She had our messages, our fear, the kitchen knife for effect, and a neat narrative ready to go. A distraught husband kills his declining wife, then himself. Tragic. Understandable.
Closed.
She was savoring it. And in that savoring, I saw the flaw. Arrogance, left slightly ajar. "You miscalculated," I said, "not because courage alone saves you, but because clean truth can interrupt a predator's rhythm." I raised my phone so she could see the active call. I had been connected to Marion for 20 minutes. Every word spoken in our wrecked kitchen had traveled to the one woman in Portland least likely to misplace evidence. Marion's thin, steady voice carried through the speaker. She said she was calling the police. The fury that flashed across Laura's face was the most honest expression I'd seen all week. When she lunged, I moved first. Years of lifting heavy books from high shelves had taught me balance and speed. I flung the coffee into her eyes and struck the knife away with the heel of my hand. Then I shouted at Robert to run, because for the first time in our marriage, his only options were to follow me or die. We bolted into the cold like teenagers escaping curfew, stumbled into the car. I drove. His hands were shaking, and I had always been the one to drive in emergencies, even when no one noticed. I called Marion back. Patrol cars were already heading to our street. She was bringing everything to the station. The Portland Police building rose ahead like a lighthouse. We hurried inside, dusted with glass, breath ragged. I heard myself say words that felt borrowed from someone else's life. Attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud. Evidence. They led us into a bright room. A recorder blinked red. A detective's pen sharpened its attention as she listened. Marion arrived with the binder and the audio. Detective Morgan turned pages of transfers, texts, timelines. Robert folded inward and tried on the costume of a man misled, admitting the affair, the planned sale, the lies, and shifting the intended killing toward Laura as if guilt were a coat he could slide across the table. I guided him, not to absolve him, but because the record mattered. I needed him frightened enough to cooperate while the net tightened. The detective said what I needed to hear. Maine allows one-party consent. The recording was admissible. An alert for Laura was already issued. A cruiser was stationed at my house. She asked if I understood how long this would take. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "I've been still long enough." In that small room, something in my life aligned. The quiet librarian who built airtight files. The wife who knew every shift in her husband's tone. The grandmother who refused to let her children inherit smoke and rumor. Survival was no longer a decision. It was a discipline. Somewhere in the city, Laura Hardy was recalculating. Somewhere on the highway, my children were driving north, holding on to versions of their parents that were about to dissolve. And inside me, a steadier woman stepped forward and took control of the narrative. Dawn would bring more than light. It would bring subpoenas, sworn statements, officers at the door, and a search for a woman who believed herself untouchable. When the detective asked me to begin again from the start, I did what I've always done best. I arranged the pieces. I completed the record. And I reset the clock, not to January 12th, but to the hour Laura Hardy would run out of places to hide. We gave our statements until the sky faded from black to gray. Robert clung to remorse and manipulation. I stayed in the narrow lane of dates, documents, facts. At 5 a.m, my children, Michael, Michelle, Jennifer, arrived pale from the drive. They wrapped me in their arms and listened as I explained the machinery built to erase me, the scheduled funeral messages, the transfers to a woman with a history, the forged charts with the wrong suite number and the wrong date. I watched their eyes shift from me to their father as evidence accomplished what love could not. When they asked him if it was true, excuses fell away. Silence settled over the room like a verdict. By sunrise, Detective Morgan told us Laura had been taken into custody at the airport. She was already negotiating, recasting herself as a consultant who wandered into someone else's chaos. I understood then that the real work was just beginning. Months of interviews, subpoenas, forensic accounting, legal language I never wanted to learn. But the center held. Marion's recording was clear and admissible. Kevin's testimony anchored the timeline. The texts and transfers established intent. For once, arrogance strengthened the truth instead of undermining it. We were released at 7. I chose daylight to return home. I thanked the young officer for his quiet praise about the coffee and the courage. Then I told him the only fact that mattered. Whatever Robert had been to me in the world's eyes, he was no longer that man. What followed was consequence, not drama. Plywood over the broken window. A conversation on a bench by the bay where I told Robert's attorney that regret would not purchase mercy. Weeks of inventories and court dates that transformed shock into documentation. Then came the outcomes. 25 years for Laura. Once financial trails and witnesses from older cases exposed the pattern. 12 years for Robert under a plea agreement that cooperation could not cleanse. A divorce decree granting me the house, the retirement accounts, and the portion of his practice that had always been mine. I did not celebrate. I restored. Like shelves returned to order after a storm. Then I began the quieter work of living. I sold the Victorian to a young family who would love the maple tree in the yard. I found a smaller place above the old port, where afternoon light spills into the kitchen from the harbor. I unpacked only what I wished to carry forward and gave the rest away. Marion convinced me to help teach digital literacy to seniors. I joined a book club that debates with conviction. I tried yoga teacher training simply because I could. I practiced saying yes to companionship that felt kind, and no to anything that felt like a bargain against myself. My children continued to arrive with groceries and wine and stories that ached and glittered at once. One night, we sat for final dinner in the emptied house. I apologized for not seeing what I hadn't wanted to see. They told me something I needed to hear. Trusting your husband is not a defect. Surviving is not shame. And whether I felt like it or not, I was their hero. A letter eventually came from prison. I read it and did not respond. Recognition is not redemption. Apology is not repair. The victory I chose was quieter. The certainty that my life was full without him, that my home reflected only my choices, that my breath no longer caught at the sound of a key turning in a lock. A year after everything changed, I stood on my balcony overlooking Casco Bay as the water burned gold and copper in the setting sun. At 66, I finally understood. Survival is more than breathing. It is refusing to surrender your name, your worth, or your future to someone else's design. And being underestimated can become a blade you hold, if you have the patience, the proof, and the resolve to stay 3 steps ahead. So tell me, what would you have done? With the clock running down and the tide shifting, with love curdled into threat and two predators circling the same prize. Share your thoughts below. And if this story gave you strength, stay for what comes next. Tap the video on your screen, because the twist that protected me might be the one that protects someone you know.